The air inside Premium Auto Repair was thick with the smell of motor oil and arrogance. Tools clanged against metal, bursts of laughter echoed off the concrete walls, and the hiss of an air compressor cut through the noise. The place was alive, not with respect for the craft, but with the easy confidence of men who believed they had already conquered everything worth knowing about machines. Grease-stained uniforms stretched across backs bent over half-finished cars, the music from a battered radio mixing with the sound of revving engines. It was another ordinary day, until the door opened. He stood there in the frame like a shadow misplaced in the wrong world. A black man, mid-50s, his clothes worn to threads, his shoes split at the seams, his gray hair uncombed, streaks of dust clinging to his coat. Yet his eyes, those eyes were startling. They burned with an intensity that cut straight through the laughter in the room. He didn't shift nervously like others who sometimes wandered in asking for change. He didn't lower his head or shuffle his feet. He stood tall, shoulders square, gaze steady, as if he carried something inside that no one in that workshop could yet name. Tyler, the youngest mechanic, was the first to break the silence. He smirked, leaning against a tool chest, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, Grandpa, you lost? Soup kitchen's down the street." His friends chuckled, the kind of laugh that wasn't about humor, but about cruelty, the laugh of men who believed themselves untouchable. The stranger ignored him. His eyes went straight to the Porsche 911 parked in the center of the shop. Its hood was open, its guts laid bare, a machine that had defied every hand in that room for 3 long days. Mechanics had poked and prodded, run scans, replaced parts, and still the car refused to roar back to life. The stranger's gaze lingered on it with a kind of familiarity, as if he was looking not at an object but at something once beloved. "I can fix that," he said, his voice calm, carrying just enough weight to still the laughter for half a beat. "All I ask in return is food." The shop erupted again. Tyler nearly dropped the wrench in his hand from laughing so hard. Jake, the senior mechanic with 20 years under his belt, wiped grease from his palms and shook his head in disbelief. "You hear this guy? He wants to fix a $200,000 Porsche for a sandwich." His voice rose so everyone could hear, and more laughter followed. At the desk, Marcus, the owner, didn't even bother to look up from his paperwork. "Jake, call security. I'm not running a charity. These guys show up here every week asking for scraps." His tone was sharp, dismissive, final. But the man didn't flinch. He took a step forward, eyes still locked on the car. "I'm not asking for scraps. I'm offering work, real work. I can fix it." The silence that followed was uneasy. There was something about his tone, the quiet authority buried inside it, that pressed against the arrogance of the room. Most brushed it off quickly, laughing again, but not Sarah. She was the only woman in the workshop, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back in a bandana, sweat streaking her forehead. She had spent days listening to the Porsche sputter and die, running her hands over its engine, failing to find the answer. And now this ragged stranger was speaking with the confidence of someone who had already solved the riddle. She studied him from the corner, her brow furrowing. His stance wasn't that of a beggar. There was no nervous twitching, no shrinking back from their laughter. Instead, he carried himself like a man used to being in control, used to pressure, used to proving people wrong. Marcus finally stood, his irritation clear, and pointed at the man. "You've got some nerve walking in here like this. My shop doesn't need freeloaders. Get out before I throw you out." He-Man's eyes didn't waver. He simply tilted his head slightly, listening as Jake turned the key in the Porsche for yet another test. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died again. The stranger's voice was steady, cutting through the noise. "Direct injection system, fuel pressure sensors failing. That's why it stalls at high revs. It's not mechanical, it's electronic." The words hung in the air like a sudden thunderclap. Jake froze. He had been tearing that car apart for 3 days, hunting for that exact fault. Tyler's laugh died on his lips and Sarah's eyes widened. She had heard the engine herself. She knew how impossibly precise that diagnosis sounded. For a moment, the workshop was silent, all eyes on the ragged man who had just walked in with nothing but a hunger in his stomach and a confidence that shouldn't have belonged to him. Suspense wrapped itself around the room, invisible but undeniable. Something about this stranger was different, and Sarah, her chest tight, couldn't shake the thought, maybe this wasn't a beggar at all. The laughter started again, but this time it carried a nervous edge. Jake glanced at the Porsche as if the stranger's calm words had crawled under his skin. Marcus, unwilling to lose his grip on the room, forced a smirk and stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the concrete floor. He looked the homeless man up and down, his eyes sharp with disdain, and spoke in a voice meant to remind everyone who held authority here. "All right then, Grandpa," Marcus said, crossing his arms. "You think you're some kind of genius? You want food? Fine. Let's make this interesting. You diagnose that car correctly, I'll give you $20 and a sandwich. But if you're wrong, you walk out of here and never show your face in my shop again." He let the words hang, then added with a cruel twist, "And I'll make sure everyone online knows about at your little scam. I'll film the whole thing. A washed-up bum trying to play mechanic. That'll get some laughs." The mechanics chuckled, but not as freely as before. The stranger didn't blink. He nodded once, almost solemnly, as if these humiliating conditions were nothing new to him. "Deal," he said simply. His voice wasn't desperate, it wasn't pleading. It carried the same quiet weight as before, unsettling in its steadiness. Tyler whistled under his breath, shaking his head. "This is gonna be good," he muttered. 5 minutes before he realizes he doesn't even know how to turn the scanner on. He slapped Jake on the back, already laughing again. But Sarah didn't laugh. She leaned against her workbench, arms folded, watching closely. There was something different in the man's eyes when he agreed to the bet. Something that looked less like hunger and more like certainty. Marcus pulled out his phone, already recording. "Okay, let's see the magic trick," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Try not to break my scanner, old man." He motioned toward the expensive diagnostic machine in the corner, a tool so advanced that even Jake, with all his years of experience, still used only half its functions. The stranger walked over slowly. His steps weren't rushed, weren't hesitant. He moved with a strange kind of calm, like a man walking towards something inevitable. When he reached the scanner, his hands brushed over the machine, and Sarah noticed something the others didn't. His fingers weren't clumsy. They weren't fumbling or unsure. They moved with practiced familiarity, as if the machine was nothing more than an old instrument he hadn't touched in years but still remembered by heart. The beeping of the scanner filled the room, sharp and mechanical, echoing in the silence. Every mechanic in the shop leaned closer, expecting the stranger to fumble, to hit the wrong buttons, to make a fool of himself. Marcus zoomed in on the screen with his phone, ready to capture the moment of failure. But the man's hands moved with precision. He bypassed the basic menus, dove straight into advanced diagnostic levels that Jake himself rarely dared to access. Tyler's mouth fell open slightly. "Wait, how the hell does he know those codes?" he whispered, but his voice carried enough for everyone to hear. The stranger didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, his jaw clenched in concentration. For a few tense minutes, the only sounds in the workshop were the faint hum of the machine and the shallow breaths of the men waiting for him to fail. Then, at last, the scanner let out a sharp tone, and the result appeared on the screen. "Code P0294, the man said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, turning his head toward Marcus, Jake, and Tyler. "Fuel pressure sensor out of parameters. Exactly what I said." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jake stepped forward quickly, squinting at the screen, his face drained of color. He's right." His voice trembled with reluctant disbelief. 3 days I've been tearing this thing apart and he finds it in 5 minutes. Tyler blinked, his smirk gone, replaced with something close to fear. "No way," he muttered. That's impossible." Marcus lowered his phone slowly, his jaw tightening. The humiliation he had planned to capture had turned into something else, something he didn't understand and didn't like. "Beginner's luck," he spat. "Anyone can press random buttons until something comes up." For the first time, the stranger smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a man basking in victory. It was thin, humorless, and carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "That wasn't luck," he said softly. "I heard it. I knew it before I touched the scanner. That noise is unique. The sensor sends inconsistent data, the system panics, and the engine cuts fuel as a safety measure. I've seen it before, many times." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Many times. That wasn't the language of a man who had read a few manuals or watched videos online. That was the language of someone who had lived and breathed these machines, someone who had been inside them in ways few ever were. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. The stranger's eyes locked with his, and for the first time all day, Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. There was something in those eyes, something that whispered of years lived at speeds and under pressures he couldn't even imagine. And in that charged silence, Sarah realized the truth. This man wasn't ordinary, and this was no lucky guess. The workshop was no longer filled with laughter. The echo of it lingered in the corners, but it had gone hollow, replaced by a tension that pressed down like heavy air before a storm. The scanner's high-pitched beep seemed to hang there, daring someone to argue, daring someone to deny what had just unfolded. Jake's hands twitched as he double-checked the reading, hoping against hope that he had misheard, that the machine had glitched, that this stranger hadn't just solved in minutes what had stumped him for days, but the code was clear, undeniable. The sensor was failing. The homeless man, still standing calm, still unshaken, stepped back from the Porsche like a surgeon who had just finished an operation. His ragged coat hung loose from his shoulders, his hair a mess, but his posture, the quiet certainty in his eyes, made him look taller than every man in that room. Jake's voice broke the silence, low and begrudging. He's right. The fuel pressure sensor's shot. That's why the engine's been cutting out. He rubbed the back of his neck, shame burning his cheeks. 3 days and I couldn't find it. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, trying to laugh, but the sound came out strained. So what? One lucky guess doesn't... I make him a genius. He spat the word him as if it was poisonous. You get one thing right, doesn't mean you belong here. The man turned his head slowly toward Tyler, and for the first time there was a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, something deeper, like a shadow of battles fought long before this day. His voice when he spoke was steady and sharp, like steel sliding from its sheath. A guess? No. I can tell you 3 other problems this car will face in the next 6 months if they aren't fixed now. Sarah straightened. The way he said it, without hesitation, without arrogance, just fact, made her pulse quicken. She pushed herself away from the bench, stepping closer. What problems? She asked, her tone cutting through the thick silence. The man hesitated. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered as if weighing how much of himself he should reveal. But then he spoke, his voice low but clear, each word carrying the weight of certainty. The coil packs are degrading. They'll start misfiring in 3 months. The catalytic converter is close to clogging. It's already showing signs. And the throttle actuator motor will fail soon because the car hasn't had the proper maintenance intervals. He paused, eyes narrowing as he looked at the Porsche like it was an old friend. I've seen this pattern before. Over and over. Jake's mouth went dry. He swallowed hard. Over and over? Where the hell would you see that? Cars like this don't just roll into some back alley garage. The stranger's face hardened, and for a moment, his silence was louder than any answer. Sarah caught it, the brief shadow in his expression, the flash of pain that didn't belong to a man making up stories. He wasn't lying. He had seen these cars, lived inside their systems, read their faults like a second language. Marcus, desperate to regain control, barked out a bitter laugh. Tricks, that's all this is, cheap tricks. Anyone can throw out guesses until something sticks. He stepped closer, inting a finger into the stranger's chest. This is my shop. You don't get to walk in here and make a fool out of us. The man didn't flinch. He turned his gaze from Marcus to the corner of the workshop, where a BMW X5 sat under a thin layer of dust. That car, he said, pointing. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. You told the customer it needed a new engine. Marcus froze. His face flickered just for an instant with something raw, fear, because the man was right. That BMW had been diagnosed weeks ago. They'd quoted the customer $15,000 for a new engine. The stranger walked toward it slowly, like a hunter stalking prey. He brushed the hood with his fingertips, then lifted it and leaned over, eyes scanning with practiced precision. The engine isn't the problem, it's the high-pressure fuel pump, a $2,200 fix. You tried to sell him a new engine because you couldn't find the answer. Tyler's face went pale. How can you possibly know that? You didn't even start the damn car. The man looked at him, his eyes steady, unyielding. I heard it earlier when you tested it. The knock wasn't mechanical. It was fuel starvation. The pump is failing. I can prove it. Jake rushed forward, fumbling with another scanner, desperate to catch him in a mistake. But when the screen lit up, when the codes aligned perfectly with the stranger's claim, Jake's shoulders slumped. His voice cracked. He's right again. The shop fell into silence once more. This time, it wasn't awkward. It was suffocating. The mechanics looked at each other, their arrogance stripped bare, their certainty crumbling. Sarah's chest tightened as she watched the man standing there, ragged and hungry, yet commanding the room with nothing but knowledge and calm. Marcus's face was red, his jaw tight with fury. Coincidence, he hissed, but his voice no longer carried the same authority. He looked at the stranger, and for the first time, his arrogance faltered. In those sharp, burning eyes, he saw something he didn't understand, something that made his blood run cold. And Sarah, standing a few feet away, realized that whoever this man was, he carried more than knowledge. He carried a past powerful enough to silence an entire workshop with nothing but the truth. Marcus's laugh sounded forced now, brittle, like glass cracking under pressure. He shoved his phone into his pocket, as though hiding the failed recording would erase the memory of what had just happened. Coincidence, he repeated, his voice rough with desperation. Anyone can make wild guesses until something fits. Don't start thinking you're special, old man. But his words didn't carry the same weight anymore. The authority he wielded so easily an hour ago now hung limp, like a flag in dead air. The stranger, this ragged figure who had walked in asking only for food, didn't need to raise his voice or puff his chest. His silence, his stillness, was louder than Marcus's anger. Sarah noticed it most of all. She had been working in that shop for years, the only woman in a sea of ego-driven men, always fighting twice as hard to prove she belonged. And yet this man, this stranger, had done more in 20 minutes than she could ever remember seeing in all her time there. He had shifted the balance of the room without effort, not with arrogance, but with certainty. Jake, still staring at the BMW, muttered under his breath, $15,000 for an engine we didn't need to replace. His voice was heavy, ashamed. He saved that customer a fortune in 5 minutes. Tyler, rattled but unwilling to surrender, forced a grin and said, "Okay, fine, Grandpa's got a good ear. But diagnosing stuff doesn't mean he can fix anything. Talking about problems and solving them are two different things." The man finally turned his eyes toward Tyler. Those burning eyes pinned the younger mechanic in place, stripping away his bravado like paint in the rain. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word cutting clean. Fixing cars isn't just about replacing parts, it's about listening, feeling, understanding what's broken before it breaks completely. A mechanic doesn't just hold a wrench, he holds responsibility. Do you understand that? Tyler swallowed hard, his grin slipping away. The shop felt smaller, the walls closer, as the man's words pressed against the arrogance that had filled it for so long. Marcus stepped forward again, clinging to whatever control he thought he had left. His voice rose, sharp and hostile. "Listen here, Grandpa. I don't know what game you're playing, but this is my shop, my rules. You want food, you beg outside. You don't come in here pretending to be some expert." He jabbed a finger toward the door. "You've wasted enough of my time. Get out." The man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he let the silence draw out, heavy and uncomfortable. Then, in a voice low but steady, he asked, "Do you want me to tell you why the Porsche sensors fail so often? Or why the BMW's fuel pumps crack years earlier than they should? I can explain the engineering flaws that even the manufacturers don't admit." The mechanics froze. Sarah's pulse quickened. No ordinary drifter would talk like that. These weren't guesses. This was knowledge. The kind earned through experience, through years buried inside machines most people could only dream of touching. Marcus scoffed, but the crack in his confidence showed in his eyes. "You talk like you've lived in these cars," he sneered. "Where? At a junkyard?" The man's face hardened, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second, as if the weight of memory pressed against him. "I've worked in many places," he said finally, his tone evasive but heavy with truth. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Sarah caught it again, that flicker of pain that crossed his face like a shadow. It wasn't the face of a liar, it was the face of someone carrying scars no one else could see. Tyler, sensing Marcus's grip slipping, tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, right. Next he's going to tell us he used to work for Porsche themselves." The man didn't answer. He simply turned and began walking toward the door, shoulders hunched, the weight of something invisible pulling him down. But just before he reached the threshold, he stopped. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it rang through the workshop like a bell. "Heroes don't exist," he said, his back still to them. "Only people who've lost everything, and still try to help others." The room went still. Not a tool clinked, not a wrench turned. For a long, heavy moment, every mechanic in that workshop felt something they couldn't name, a chill that had nothing to do with the air. Then, without another word, he pushed the door open and stepped out into the street. Sarah stood frozen, her throat tight. She felt it in her gut. This wasn't the last time they would see him. There was more to this man than his torn coat and his hungry eyes. Something vast and tragic lay beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. And for the first time since she had started working at Premium Auto Repair, Sarah was certain of one thing. The stranger who had walked through their door today was going to change everything. That night, the shop closed its doors, but Sarah couldn't quiet the storm inside her. The others had shrugged it off, laughing away their discomfort, burying their shame beneath arrogance and excuses. But Sarah, she couldn't. She replayed every moment in her mind, the way the stranger's hands had moved across the scanner with precision, the way his voice carried knowledge no textbook could teach, the way his eyes had darkened when Marcus mocked at him, There was something there, something bigger than a homeless man desperate for a sandwich. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His last words haunted her. Heroes don't exist, only people who've lost everything and still try to help others. Those weren't the words of a beggar looking for pity. They were the words of a man who had lived through fire and walked out burned but unbroken. By dawn, Sarah was back at the shop. The air smelled of oil and metal, the same as every morning, but it felt different to her now. She powered up the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She typed in the terms he had used so casually the day before: direct injection system, fuel pressure sensor, high pressure pump. She dove into forums, technical bulletins, obscure corners of the internet where only seasoned engineers and high-performance specialists traded knowledge. And there it was. Over and over, the exact details he had spoken about were written in long, complex threads. Failures in specific Porsche models, predictable breakdowns in BMW fuel systems. Information so detailed and technical that no ordinary mechanic would memorize it. Sarah leaned closer, her heart thudding. This wasn't the language of someone guessing. This was the voice of someone who had been there, who had worked on these machines, who had lived inside their faults and solutions. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing here so early?" She turned to see Tyler yawning, a coffee in hand, his eyes still foggy from sleep. She swallowed hard, then spun the screen toward him. "Look at this. These are the same things he said yesterday. This isn't luck. This is real. He knows what he's talking about." Tyler rolled his eyes, sipping his coffee. Or maybe he just reads the same forums. Anyone with an internet connection can play expert. Sarah shook her head. "No, you didn't see his hands. He wasn't reading something he half remembered. He knew he's lived this." Before Tyler could respond, Marcus stormed in, his face pinched with irritation. "Don't tell me you're still obsessing over that bum. He played us, that's all, and you're falling for it." Sarah straightened in her chair. "He didn't play us, Marcus. He saved us. If he hadn't been here, we would have charged a customer 15 grand for an engine they didn't need. Do you have any idea what that would have done to our reputation?" Marcus scoffed, waving her off. "Reputation is built on confidence, not on babysitting every idiot who walks through the door." Sarah clenched her fists, biting back her words. She could see it in his eyes. Marcus wasn't just dismissive, he was afraid. Afraid of what it meant that a man with nothing could walk in and expose him so completely. Before she could argue, the workshop door creaked open. The stranger stepped back inside. His coat looked heavier today, weighed down by invisible chains. His eyes were tired, but they still carried that same steady burn, and this time, he wasn't alone. By his side stood an elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored suit, her hair pinned neatly, her presence radiating wealth and authority, the kind of customer Marcus would usually bow to without hesitation. The stranger's voice was calm, deliberate as he introduced her. "This is Catherine Morrison. She owns a McLaren 720S you said was beyond repair." The words landed like a hammer. Marcus paled. That McLaren had been his biggest failure in months, an impossible job no shop in town had solved. He had told Catherine it was dead, a machine unfixable. Now here she was, standing beside the man he had tried to humiliate for a sandwich. "Good morning," Catherine said, her tone polite but sharp. "This gentleman gave me a technical explanation of my car last night. Details so precise I decided to bring him here myself. If he says he can fix it, I trust him more than any of you." The room went silent. Tyler's mouth fell open. Jake's face turned red. Marcus's jaw clenched. And Sarah, standing in the corner, felt her pulse race. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she knew one thing for certain. The man who had walked into their shop as a beggar was about to reveal even more of the truth he carried inside. The workshop seemed to hold its breath as Catherine Morrison's heels clicked across the concrete floor. She didn't belong in that oil-stained place. Her presence was like a queen stepping into a back-alley tavern, poised, elegant, commanding without effort. All eyes followed her, but Sarah's gaze never left the man who had walked in beside her. The stranger's coat hung heavy on his shoulders, but there was no slump in his posture today. He carried himself differently, as if bringing Catherine with him had given him a new kind of armor. He moved to the center of the shop and stopped in front of Marcus, who stood stiff, jaw tight, every vein in his neck visible. "This," the man said calmly, "is the McLaren you dismissed as a lost cause." His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. It was quiet, steady, yet it cut through the room with a sharpness that no one dared interrupt. Marcus felt every mechanic watching him, and his arrogance began to crumble under the weight of their silence. He forced a smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Ah, Ms. Morrison," he said quickly, stepping forward as though he could smooth over months of failure with a single gesture. "If I recall correctly, that car's problems were beyond standard repair. Even McLaren dealerships struggle with issues like that. You told me," Catherine interrupted coldly, "that my only option was to buy a new hybrid module for $80,000. You looked me in the eye and said the problem was impossible to fix. And yet last night, this gentleman described the exact failure, conflict in the software protocols between combustion and electric drive. He explained it in a way that made sense, something you never did." The workshop froze. Tyler dropped the rag he had been fiddling with. Jake's brow furrowed, and for once he had no words. Sarah felt goosebumps rise along her arms. The way Catherine's words framed it, the stranger wasn't just some lucky guesser anymore. He was someone who knew secrets only insiders should know. Marcus laughed, but it was thin, desperate. "A lucky guess, Ms. Morrison. These bums, they read things online, they memorize jargon. Don't mistake tricks for knowledge." The stranger's eyes flicked toward Marcus, and for the first time, a spark of anger lit within them. "Tricks?" he repeated softly. He turned to Catherine, then back to Marcus. "Give me 2 hours. If I don't fix it, I'll walk out of here and never return. You can laugh, film it, post it, whatever you like. But if I succeed..." He paused, letting the silence stretch until even Marcus had to lean forward. "If I succeed, you give me a real chance. Not for a sandwich, for work." The challenge hovered in the air like thunder before a storm. Everyone felt it. This wasn't about a car anymore. It was about pride, power, truth. Marcus clenched his teeth, but Catherine's expectant gaze left him no choice. If he refused, he'd look like a coward. If he agreed, he risked humiliation. But Marcus had built his empire on arrogance, and he couldn't back down now. "Fine," he spat. 2 hours, but when you fail, you're out of my sight for good." The man nodded once, then turned to the McLaren. He ran his hand along the hood as though greeting an old friend. His touch was reverent, not mechanical, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Sarah saw the way his fingers linger, trembling slightly, not with fear, but with memory. It was as if this car wasn't just metal and wires to him. It was part of a language he hadn't spoken in years, but still remembered by heart. The shop fell into a strange quiet as he began. Tools clinked softly in his hands, each movement precise. He didn't waste time fumbling through manuals or guessing at possibilities. He knew exactly where to look, which wires to test, which codes to bypass. His brow furrowed with concentration, and the world seemed to narrow down to just him and the machine. Catherine leaned closer to Sarah and whispered, "Do you see how he works? Last night, when he explained it to me, I knew I was hearing a master. Watching him now, it's like watching an artist paint." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Or a surgeon saving a life." The minutes ticked away, but no one dared speak above a whisper. Even Tyler, usually quick with sarcasm, kept his mouth shut, his eyes glued to the man's hands. Jake hovered nearby, drawn in by a mix of suspicion and awe. 1 hour passed. Sweat beaded on the stranger's forehead, but his movements remained steady, deliberate. Every now and then, his lips moved silently, as if he were speaking to the car itself, coaxing it back to life. 2 hours later, he stepped back. His chest rose and fell with measured breaths. He wiped his hands on his coat, leaving streaks of grease across the worn fabric. Then he turned to Catherine, his eyes steady, calm, and said only one word: "Done." Catherine slid into the driver's seat. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the key. The McLaren came alive with a roar so pure, so powerful, that the walls of the workshop seemed to vibrate. Gone were the stutters, the choking hesitations, the mechanical groans. What filled the air now was smooth, controlled strength, the voice of a machine restored to glory. Catherine's eyes filled. With tears, she pressed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. "It's perfect," she whispered. "My God, it's perfect." The mechanics stood frozen, staring as though they had just witnessed something impossible. Jake looked down, ashamed. Tyler's jaw hung open. Marcus's face drained of color, his arrogance stripped bare. And Sarah, her chest tight with awe, knew without a shred of doubt, this man was no ordinary drifter. He was someone extraordinary, someone carrying a past powerful enough to silence the proudest men in the room. And she needed to know who he really was. The roar of the McLaren echoed in every corner of the workshop like a hymn. Its engine purred with flawless rhythm, the kind of sound that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who knew cars. For 3 months, the machine had sat like a corpse, Dead, silent, hopeless. And now, under the hands of a man the world had mocked only yesterday, it was alive again. Catherine eased her foot on the accelerator, the deep growl reverberating through the concrete walls. She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. They told me it couldn't be done. They said it was impossible. Her voice broke. She turned toward the man standing there, ragged coat still draped across his shoulders. But you... She shook her head, overwhelmed. You made it sing again. The stranger didn't smile. He didn't bask in the praise or soak in the stunned silence that surrounded him. He simply nodded once, as if fixing a $600,000 masterpiece was nothing more than brushing dust from a shelf. His hands, though, they betrayed him. They trembled faintly as he wiped them on the edge of his coat, not with nerves, but with something heavier. Memory. Sarah caught it. The way his eyes lingered on the engine, not with pride but with sorrow. The way his fingers curled into fists as though fighting against ghosts only he could see. She felt her breath hitch in her throat. He wasn't just a mechanic. No, he was something more, something bigger, something broken and extraordinary all at once. Tyler muttered under his breath, but the awe in his voice betrayed him. No way. No damn way. He rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the car like it had just risen from the grave. How the hell did he even... Jake didn't answer. His face was red, shame carved deep into his features. For the first time in his 20 years on the job, he felt like a student again, standing in the shadow of a master whose very presence exposed his limits. He looked down at his grease-stained hands and wondered how many times his arrogance had blinded him. But Marcus refused to yield. His pride was a mountain he couldn't climb down from, no matter how much it crumbled beneath him. His voice cracked with forced laughter, but his eyes betrayed panic. So what? One trick, that's all. Anybody can get lucky once. Once? Catherine snapped, her composure breaking as she stepped from the car. 3 dealerships failed me. 2 other shops gave up. And you... She turned on Marcus, her voice trembling with fury. You lied to my face. You told me to throw away my car, to pay $80,000 for something he just fixed in 2 hours. The mechanics turned toward Marcus, the weight of her words pressing down on them all. The arrogance that had once filled the room now felt like smoke after a fire. Thin, choking, impossible to ignore. The stranger finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying to every corner. It wasn't a trick. It was knowing what to listen for. Machines talk if you know their language. But most people, they don't listen. The shop fell silent again. There was no mockery now, no sneering laughter. Only the sound of the McLaren's perfect hum, filling the void left by shattered pride. Sarah felt her chest ache. Every instinct told her this man wasn't just skilled, he was haunted. He carried a sorrow that bled into every war, every movement, every silence. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed to understand it. The stranger began gathering the few tools he had borrowed, moving with the same calm precision as before. Catherine tried to press money into his hand, but he shook his head. I didn't do it for that, he said quietly. I did it because it needed to be done. His refusal only deepened the mystery. What kind of man could fix the unfixable, walk away from thousands of dollars, and still carry himself with the humility of someone asking only for food? As he turned toward the door, Sarah called out. Her voice trembled, but she couldn't let him leave. Wait, who are you? The man paused. For a heartbeat, she thought he might finally tell them. But then his shoulders slumped under the weight of invisible chains. He glanced over his shoulder, and in his eyes, Sarah saw a storm, a mixture of brilliance, pain, and secrets buried too deep. I've been many things, he said softly, but never what people thought I was. Then he pushed the door open and stepped into the fading light of evening, leaving behind the hum of a revived McLaren, a shop full of stunned silence, and a single burning question in Sarah's heart. Who was this man really? The workshop was dark, the air still heavy with the echoes of the McLaren's revival. But Sarah couldn't sleep. Even after everyone had gone home, after the lights were cut and the doors locked, his presence lingered, like the residue of a storm that refuses to pass. She sat in her small apartment, laptop balanced on her knees, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. The question gnawed at her insides. Who was he? Her fingers danced across the keys. She started with the words he had spoken so casually: direct injection, pressure sensors, throttle actuators. The level of detail wasn't just something a backyard tinkerer would know. These were conversations that belonged in elite forums, the kind where engineers, racing crews, and high-performance specialists traded knowledge like precious gold. She dug deeper. Threads from years ago, names she didn't recognize, but then one caught her eye, a username, Dark Horse Racing. The posts were old, some dating back to 2007, but the voice in them was hauntingly familiar. Detailed breakdowns of Porsche failures years before they became common, notes about BMW pumps, McLaren hybrid systems, predictions written in a way that read less like speculation and more like certainty. Sarah's pulse quickened. She leaned closer, scanning the comments. Beneath one long technical post was a reply. "Nobody explains cars like you do, Ghost. It's like you can hear what we can't." Ghost. Her hands trembled as she typed the name into the search bar. Ghost Racing Legend. The results came back fast. Articles, old photos, headlines that once screamed across the sports world. David the Ghost Williams, 3-time Formula One champion. Sarah's breath caught. She clicked the first article. A younger version of the man filled the screen. Dark hair slicked with sweat, champagne bottle in hand, the crowd behind him a sea of flags and roaring voices. His eyes were the same, sharp, burning, alive. The face of a legend who had risen out of nowhere, dominating races with impossible comebacks. A driver so fearless, they said he could see through the chaos. She scrolled further. A chill washed over her as the story unfolded. In 2009, Monaco. A crash at nearly 300 kilometers per hour. David survived, but his 8-year-old daughter, watching from the stands, suffered a heart attack from the shock and died in the hospital hours later. The article's words blurred as Sarah blinked back tears. 6 months later, his wife took her own life, unable to bear the grief. And David, the legend, the champion, the man the world had crowned as untouchable, disappeared. He sold everything, donated millions to charities, walked away from the spotlight. No interviews, no appearances. For 15 years, he became a ghost. Not just on the track, but in the world. Sarah's hand covered her mouth as the weight of it sank in. The ragged man they had laughed at, the man Marcus had tried to humiliate for a sandwich, was a legend who had once commanded $500,000 machines at breathtaking speeds, a man who had held trophies higher than most could dream, and lost everything in a single cruel twist of fate. She whispered into the empty room, her voice shaking. David Williams. The ghost. The realization cut deep. The humility in his eyes. The sadness when he saw the missing child's poster. The way he refused Catherine's money. It all made sense now. He wasn't just living in poverty. He was living in penance. Sarah closed her laptop slowly, her heart thundering in her chest. Tomorrow the others would keep laughing. Marcus would still sneer. Tyler would still mock. But she knew. She had seen behind the curtain. The man they had dismissed was someone who had once ruled the world and chosen silence instead of glory. And in that silence, she felt a storm coming. Because if David Williams, the ghost, had returned to their lives, it wasn't by accident. It was only the beginning. Morning light spilled across Premium Auto Repair, but the workshop felt colder than usual. Marcus strutted around, barking orders louder than necessary, trying to drown the memory of yesterday's humiliation. Tyler and Jake played along, laughing too loudly, pretending nothing had happened. But Sarah knew, they all knew, the silence that followed the McLaren's roar had shaken them in ways they didn't want to admit. She was tightening a bolt when the door opened. The sound of it creaking across the floor made every head turn. And there he was, again, the stranger, the man they had mocked. Only today, he wasn't alone. David Williams stepped through the door with a calm stride, his ragged coat still clinging to him. A disguise he no longer needed. Beside him walked Catherine Morrison, poised and elegant as always. And behind her, 3 figures who didn't belong in this oil-stained place at all. The first was a tall man in a tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back, his very presence demanding attention. Sarah recognized him instantly. Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Automotive Group, the largest luxury dealership chain on the East Coast. A man who dealt with fleets worth millions. A man Marcus had begged for contracts from in the past. Marcus froze. The color drained from his face. "Mr. Reed," he stammered, straightening his shirt, forcing a smile. "What an unexpected honor." Jonathan Reed didn't smile back. He extended his hand, past Marcus, past Jake and Tyler, straight to David. "Mr. Williams," he said with quiet respect, "when Catherine told me what you did with her McLaren, I had to see it for myself." A hush fell over the room. Sarah's heart pounded. Tyler's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Jake's mouth opened, but no words came. Marcus blinked rapidly, his forced smile twitching. Mr. Williams?" He turned toward David, his voice faltering. As in, the ghost? David's eyes met his, calm and unflinching, as in the man you tried to humiliate for a sandwich. The words cracked through the workshop like a whip. Sarah felt goosebumps race across her skin. Tyler looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. Jake shook his head in disbelief, whispering, "My God, it's him. I had posters of him in my room. I watched his races." His voice trailed off, awe swallowing him whole. Marcus's hands trembled, but he tried to salvage control. I didn't know who you were. If I had known..." David cut him off with a look sharp enough to pierce steel. "You didn't need to know who I was. Respect isn't reserved for people with names you recognize. It's a wed to every human being who walks through that door." Reed's voice joined his, cold and commanding. "Marcus Thompson, is it? My company had a maintenance contract with you. 50 cars a month, $300,000 a year. As of this moment, it's canceled. I don't do business with men who treat people like garbage." Marcus staggered back as if the words were physical blows. "No, wait, please, this is a misunderstanding. Catherine's voice cut him off. "A misunderstanding? You lied to me. You told me to throw away my car when all it needed was a real mechanic. You tried to make a fool out of a man who put you to shame. That isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson. That's arrogance." Tyler stepped forward, desperate. "It wasn't like that. We were just joking." David's gaze pinned him in place. "Joking? You laughed at hunger. You laughed at loss. You planned to film a man's humiliation and post it online for your entertainment. Tell me, what part of that is a joke?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus's chest rose and fell in panic. Jake lowered his head, shame carving deep lines in his face. Tyler's usual grin had evaporated. Sarah felt her throat tighten as she looked at David. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like thunder rolling through the earth. This wasn't just a man standing in rags. This was the ghost, a legend who had risen and fallen, who had carried grief most couldn't imagine, and who now stood before them with nothing left to prove. Jonathan Reed broke the silence, turning back to David. "Mr. Williams, I would be honored if you'd join Reed Automotive Group as technical director of our performance division. Starting salary, $500,000 a year, plus profit sharing. If you want more, name it." The offer struck like lightning. Tyler gasped. Jake looked stunned. Marcus's knees nearly buckled, but David didn't even blink. His eyes remained on Arcus, cold and steady. "Funny," David said softly. "Yesterday you told me I should know my place. Today you're learning yours." Marcus swallowed hard, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of humiliation. His lips parted, but no words came. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she would never forget. Power wasn't in money or contracts or titles. Power was in dignity, in humility, in truth. And David Williams, once a racing legend, now a man who had lost everything, had more power in his quiet, steady voice than Marcus had ever held in his entire life. The air inside Premium Auto Repair was so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Marcus stood pale and trembling, his pride shattered, his reputation bleeding out in front of his own employees. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his usual smirk gone, replaced by wide-eyed fear. Jake couldn't even meet David's gaze. Sarah, however, stood rooted in place, her chest tight with awe. She had been right all along. This man was not just anyone. He was the ghost. Jonathan Reed waited patiently, his offer still on the table. Catherine Morrison remained poised beside him, arms folded, her eyes sharp as she studied Marcus's downfall. And David Williams, the man who had once conquered the world of Formula One, the man who had disappeared into silence, stood calm, his ragged coat draped over shoulders that carried invisible scars. "Mr. Williams," Reed said, his voice deliberate, "I meant what I said. Join us. Lead my performance division. $500,000 a year, profit shares, and complete authority over our technical teams. Men like you don't come around twice in a lifetime." The room waited for David's answer. For a moment, the silence stretched too long. He looked around slowly, his eyes sweeping across the workshop that had mocked him, dismissed him, humiliated him. He looked at Marcus, whose arrogance now clung to him like a drowning man clings to driftwood. He looked at Sarah, the only one who had believed, who had defended him when no one else dared. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a storm breaking. "Yesterday, I came here hungry. All I asked for was food, and you," he looked directly at Marcus, "saw a chance to laugh. You saw a chance to strip away what little dignity I had left." His eyes flicked to Tyler and Jake. And you followed him because mocking a man who looks broken is easier than admitting the truth. That arrogance cost you your integrity. Now it will cost you everything else. Marcus's lips trembled. Please, David, I didn't know. You didn't need to know who I was, David cut in. His tone was cold steel. Respect isn't earned only by fame. It's owed by default, and you failed that test. Reed turned to Marcus, his expression hard. As of this moment, Reed Automotive Group will never send another vehicle through your doors. $300,000 a year in contracts, gone. Catherine added, her voice crisp. And I'll make sure no one at my club or in my circle brings their business here again. People like me remember things like this. Marcus's face crumpled. He reached out a trembling hand, but David stepped back, his eyes blazing. Don't beg now. Yesterday you laughed at a man's hunger. Today you choke on your own. The final blow came from Sarah. Her voice, steady but laced with fire, cut through the silence. And I recorded everything, Marcus. Every word you and the others said. I already posted the truth online. 15,000 shares in 2 hours. By tonight, the whole city will know what happened here. Marcus staggered back like the words had struck him physically. He looked around his own shop, his kingdom, and saw only walls closing in. His empire of arrogance had collapsed in a single day, and there was no rebuilding it. David turned back to Jonathan Reed. I'll accept your offer, Chet, he said at last, though his voice carried no triumph, but only on one condition. Reed raised a brow. Name it. David's eyes softened as they landed on Sarah. She comes with me. She believed when no one else did. And people like her are the reason men like me can stand again. Sarah's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. She had never expected to be part of something so much larger than herself. Yet here he was, this broken legend, offering her a place at his side. Reed smiled faintly. Done. Welcome aboard, both of you. David nodded once, then turned to leave. But just before he reached the door, he paused. He looked back at Marcus one last time. Yesterday, you told me I should know my place. Today, the world knows yours. And it's not standing at the top. It's standing in the ashes of your own arrogance. With that, he stepped outside, the light spilling over him as if the world itself had been waiting for his return. Reed, Catherine, and Sarah followed, leaving behind a shop that had once thrived on pride, but now lay in ruins. By evening, the video Sarah had posted had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. Headlines screamed, homeless man revealed as racing legend after humiliation at local shop. The public rallied, shocked and furious at Marcus's cruelty. Premium Auto Repair lost every contract, every customer, every shred of credibility. Within 2 months, the doors closed for good. But David Williams, the ghost, rose again. Not to reclaim his old glory, but to begin something new. As technical director at Reed Automotive, he built machines that carried his name not through speed, but through precision, through truth. And Sarah stood beside him, her career transformed by the simple act of believing when no one else would. In an interview months later, David spoke words that echoed across the world. Prejudice blinds us to greatness. Respect Rev. All's it. I was never hungry for food. I was hungry for dignity. And I found it again, not because of money, not because of fame, but because one person chose to listen. And the legend of the ghost lived once more, not on the track, but in the hearts of all who heard his story.